Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Robert Winters, and
I'm Patrick
meanwhile,
Barrett.
Mr. Barrett is with us here as well. How the hell are you, Patrick?
I'm the hell fine. Thank you for asking. And happy past Halloween.
Yeah. Actually, I believe some city councilors actually dressed up in costumery, but they kind of ended up not looking anything more than just a little silly, quite honestly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. All right. Anyway, I wanted to just say one thing just off the top here, which is that which has nothing to do with Cambridge politics or civics or boards and commissions or traffic or anything like that. But it was just sort of a personal thing. Is that I have a very old friend, one of my oldest friends on earth, is a fellow named Keith Streng, who happens to be the lead guitarist with a band called the Fleshtones, which has been a New York band, has been playing since the 1970s, actually. He actually lives in Sweden now, and out of the blue yesterday, actually Sunday, and played with a mess that they do on Sundays at the Plough Stars. And it was great. He played with a Swedish band called Stupidity, which is the weirdest name, right? Isn't it? Here we go. That's this handsome gent over here is Keith.
I'm here for it.
And Keith also plays with another band called Split Squad, where the organ player is Josh Kantor, who is also the player who plays organ at Fenway Park. And actually, Josh sat in with the band on Sunday as well, playing like a little mini organ, which was funny. But he's really really a wonderful fellow. Anyway, so it was particularly great. Actually, who the drummer is with Split Squad, which is Keith's other band, is actually Clem Burke, who's the drummer for Blondie.
Wow.
And there's another member of the band from the group called the Plimsolls. So anyway, it's funny because when you're hanging out with somebody who you just think of as your friend Keith, who you used to spend a lot of time with growing up and drinking beers and stuff, and then when you're out on the street, people go, "Oh my God, can I take a picture with you, sir? Please, please, please." Something. Oh my
Robert,
God,
you name dropper.
No, it's funny as hell because they're treating him as like he's a star, and I'm saying, but it's Keith. Come on, it's just Keith, Anyway, I just wanted to mention that it was really kind of great. And I have to say, I haven't been to Plough for a long time, and Plough is Plough's a great place.
Plough is a great place, and a good spot for bands to sort of run through, similar to how the All Asia used to be back a million years ago. In terms
really
of
true.
Small stage, quick setup.
Mark Sandman, who is, Mark Sandman is Square. It's actually the name for the square at right where the Middle East is. Mark was with a band called Treat Her Right, and then eventually a band called Morphine. Mark died prematurely, but they were like practically the house band at the Plough for a good while, as either Treat Her Right and then Morphine. So anyway, it really was taking me back.
Rock and roll.
It was definitely a nice rock and roll diversion for me personally. So anyway, back to Cambridge related stuff. Actually, one quick little thing here, just really, really brief. Our COVID numbers are actually looking pretty damn good right now. There was one new death recorded today, which is horrifying, but we're actually down to a 7-day daily average of only 11 now. We're almost back down to single digits. So again, we don't know what the future holds, but I think we should at least take a moment to sort of say that this is a pretty good trend. So, hallelujah. So, what did happen up at the Cambridge City Council last night of interest?
Well, as you said, a few councilors dressed up. They all went trick-or-treating and had a great time, as far as I know.
They actually only had a 1-hour meeting, which is always a good thing, right?
Well, I think to Mayor Siddiqui's credit, she had sort of passed a memo around saying we need to wrap this up quickly so staff can get to their children and go trick-or-treating and enjoy the holiday. We have plenty of time to be jerks to each other later. I'm not sure that was the exact memo. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but most people got that memo. A few very specific people did not.
Right. By the way, yesterday, which was officially Halloween, I just happened, because it's right up the street from me, happened by the little parklet that's next to 344 Broadway, which is where the
Mhm.
community development department is located. They were having a Halloween gathering for staff out in the little park,
Oh,
and there
cool.
was Jeff Roberts, the zoning expert, zoning go-to guy now for the community development department, dressed as a skeleton. It was, I said, Josh, man, but what I said to him was, Jeff, you really have to do that in front of the planning board.
I think you should wear that all the time. I would actually go a step further. Maybe you should dress up as the Cambridge zoning ordinance itself, as a skeleton.
There we
Um,
go. Yeah. So
but,
every once
but
in a while, there are moments when this city actually starts to feel like a little town again. So
yeah,
this was one of those little moments where I enjoyed it a lot, and I got
I,
a few Kit Kat bars for my efforts too.
I kind of miss those moments, and I get excited when I see them again in terms of feeling like a small town. Like it's one of the few places I've lived where like we do punch above our weight a lot, but it is super duper small in
Yeah.
terms of the community itself. We know everybody.
Yeah, and I've said this probably before, even probably said it to you too, is that when I first came here back in 1978,
My
um,
God.
I was really quite shocked with, in New York City, where I lived once upon a time, as a Yankees fan once upon a time, as well, I might
It's
add.
okay. It's okay.
Um, if a street light went out, by the time you actually got somebody from Con Edison or so whomever, whatever, to come out and fix it, it might be weeks. And
Mhm.
then a street light was out across the street from my house here, like within weeks of my living here. And I called up somebody and it was done. It was fixed within the hour. And I thought,
Wow.
well, that's pretty good.
That's very
And
good.
it was the difference between a big bureaucratic city and a service oriented small town. And I liked it a lot. I worry sometimes that we're drifting a little bit more toward bureaucracy, but every once in a while, if as long as enough people who were born and raised here are still in city government to kind of bring us down to earth, I think maybe we can still retain
Us,
small
us
towns.
new people are okay too, Mr.
Listen, I was
Indigenous
one of them
peoples.
those new people too, once upon a time. To a real native Cantabrigian, I'm still just a mouse in the oven. It ain't a biscuit. you know.
I actually think we could get to being that small town a lot easier if we actually bridged a lot of those gaps in terms of new people, old people, whatever. But in terms of last night at City Council, wow, super exciting stuff in that action-packed hour. A citizen's petition that just came out of nowhere.
Well, he says, I can't tell if you're being thoroughly facetious there, but
A
but
citizen's petition that was telegraphed by Mr. Quentin Zondervan, Councillor Zondervan, at his own committee hearing on the exact same petition a month prior.
this
Uh,
is the petition on banning laboratories in all but a few
right.
portions of the city, industrial areas.
They mention the squares, but they also have a table of uses that sort of signals to me that there's more than just the squares that they're interested in banning its use. They also go as far as to define what a lab is, which I think is an overly broad definition that really could lend itself to being just about any commercial use. But the bigger issue,
I will give them credit only because I think somebody's got to start that process of coming up with some sort of definition.
yeah, but this is
So a bad definition is not a good equivalent to
I wouldn't give them credit for anything, Robert, because that discussion has been ongoing for a long time. It's just like all things, we move very slowly. And the idea of defining something that's so integral to our DNA as a city, I think should be approached very cautiously. However, what sticks in my craw, if I have a craw for something to stick in, is the fact that he telegraphed it a month ago. He advertised it in his newsletter to contact the head of the Cambridge Residents Alliance to sign the petition. I have a spreadsheet with his aide and that same person from the Cambridge Residents Alliance signatures all over the place, and he pretends like, oh, I had no idea this was a thing, and you're like, dude, like, you're killing me here. Like, this is an important conversation to have, and you're playing a really stupid game.
Actually, just a little more background on it was that there was a proposal introduced, I believe, by Councilors Zondervan and McGovern
Yes.
in a month or something ago, can't remember
Yeah.
exactly. Basically, it was of similar nature, very, very similar actually. And then they batted it around. I think it was made subject of the charter right by Paul Toner,
Yeah.
and then they agreed to table it while it was referred to but it was referred to at least one, but I believe two separate city council committees, because at least 8 of them believed that this was a subject so substantial that it needed
Yes.
to really be thought through with all the nuance and all the care necessary before being
Well,
basically, thrown right into the zoning timeline.
to me, it shows a patent lack of self-control on behalf of the counselor who brought his first petition during the very heated conversation about linkage, which we have studies that show labs are what pay linkage. And I'm not going to go back and explain what linkage is. You need to go watch other episodes or whatever, or read a book. But to do that at that time seemed just unhinged, but then not getting his way, having it put into a committee, and then setting about to not only advertise the petition, but to have his own aide go and collect signatures for a citizen's petition, which, so people understand, has a very different pathway in terms of the law. A citizen's petition has to go to ordinance and to planning board, the 2 places that Quinton was denied a month ago. Now think about that process right there, that loophole in process, that if any counselor wanted to have their aide go collect signatures or employ the aid of a private citizen to go do that for them, they could just circumvent the entire process whenever it suited them. Robert.
I'm going to go out on well, and just to be clear, at last night's meeting, when this more or less the same petition was introduced as now a citizen's petition and forced so that Mr. Zondervan could have his way over the objections of 8 colleagues, and they started going one after another, pretty much ready to rip him a new one for it, right? What I'm going to say straight out is just this, is that if you're going to be using your so-called city council aide, supposedly research assistant, to do political organizing work, then that aide should be fired.
Yeah.
His name is Dan Totten, and he should be fired. It's that simple.
So we're having a moment right now. We're also doing charter review, and the charter was written prior to the creation of these aides. And maybe we ought to make them subject to the same rules and restrictions that city councilors are, so they don't use them as proxies. And maybe we can call it the Totten rule. So we know when there's a rotten apple in the bunch, we can pluck them right out because they're circumventing the process. I just can't think of how. And I'm not mad at Quinton. I have no expectations of him or Dan really. What I do have expectation is this process in our city. How can we function as a city? This is how we do business. If every time we don't get our way, we just find a way to circumvent that through what I consider to be not illegal, but unethical process.
Well, I mean, it's just, they just recently had a meeting where they talked about collegiality. It was actually a private, what do they call it?
Didn't they do trust falls like a week ago?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. They were doing trust falls, right? And then, a week and a half later, they're sticking knives in each other's backs. It's great. But I have to give credit to the other counselors. They were appropriately outraged. But here's the dilemma: if there is to be a call for a sort of change in the roles of what's allowable for city council aides, or even who should be allowed to be city council aides, there's a real dilemma there, because many other city councilors in past and currently use former wives, campaign managers, campaign operatives, political operatives, as their city council aides, and so the thing is that yes, they can be critical of Mr. Zondervan for really going over the top now, but in fact, each of them, not each of them, I shouldn't say that, but some of the other city councilors, have used their have, I think, improperly used the position of city council aide, basically in the furtherance of their own political fortunes.
So I think where this is a very different issue, Robert, is that in this particular instance, there's already a matter in committee, an order by the counselor himself in committee that he did, where he went and charged people with circumventing that process. That's, having a counselor aide, like, do some political, and I just think it's taken it to a completely different level in terms of
I agree with you. I think this was
violating the
really,
process.
yeah, this was pretty much over the top.
And like, and for my beloved Central Square, which I rarely ever leave, like here we are once again batting around Central Square specifically, almost on the cusp of the 9-year anniversary of C2, and
Which C2, for those who don't know, is the C2 part of K2 C2, which was Kendall Square, Central Square, and places in between. It was part of a whole study group that lasted for what, 3 years, something like that, 2-3 years.
3 years. You don't include the first 2 years of the Red Ribbon Commission before that.
Exactly.
And it had zoning, and if we had adopted it when we were supposed to, like that sign says, when you get on the expressway, you'd be home by now. So we lived in an environment where rates were half of what they currently were, construction costs were low, and we could have built thousands of units in Central Square of housing, but we didn't do it because the same people who were bringing this lab ban, same people who brought us the Yanow petition, the same people who brought us Crush Hour, which was, that if we passed C2, dogs and cats would have gotten married, it would have been mass hysteria, are running the show. So like, to me, it's just baffling that we're still locked in this sort of perpetual cycle of dumb.
I used to feel that, especially under a planning form of government, that there was a certain level of continuity possible. So even as, some city councilors make their exit and some new ones come in, there was a bit of a consistency in that you had a lot of commonality of city staff and department heads and city managers over the years, so that, things would, maybe they rise, fall a little bit, there would be some alteration. But, that's, the inconsistency that I've seen here, where they actually put together study groups, do planning studies, and then basically just forget about them for a good long while, if not forever. That's not something I would normally have expected out of this type of government form. So
it's wasteful, but it's also, I think, and money isn't really the biggest resource that we're wasting. We're wasting citizen participation. We're wasting really the belief that this system works in any reasonable way. And now we have really a handful of super citizens who claim to have, the largest signed petition, when the head of the DSA kids has been using his own lists through his own counselor to get those signatures, advertising through a city councilor. No wonder why they got so many signatures on it. I bet half the people didn't know what they're signing. Like, it just,
well, I mean, actually,
even
in 2020, when there was the abolish the police, defund the police movements, some of these same people were very much involved in organizing protests, major protests on City Hall. And I think, well, it's okay. I mean, public's right of redress, right of assembly, right of free speech, all of that thing. But there is something a little unsavory when actually elected officials and their staff are organizing the protest against the very building in which they're operating. I think, let somebody else just do this, okay?
And to not own it, like, just own it. Say you did it. Say, admit that you orchestrated the damn thing, and then recuse yourself from voting.
Right. Well, actually, let's throw in one other thing too here, which is that, as a taxpayer, I have a particularly deep resentment for the notion that political activism is being funded by my tax dollars. I wanted my tax dollars to fund city services, city administration costs, overhead, deliberation, legislative work, and whatever, not political activism. I don't really think that that is properly should be under the umbrella of tax, revenue, tax revenue. And the fact that this has been allowed, and by the way, when city council aides were first introduced or made sort of part, and they got snuck in, let's not kid ourselves, they got snuck in basically as a concession when one person wanted to be mayor. They were originally funded out of the mayor's budget and then turned into funding for the city council office, originally as part-time research assistants. I raised some objections about it back then. There were people in the city administration that raised objections back then, but they didn't want to go against it because, after all, there's always a city manager contract in the horizon, and you don't want to kind of tick off your bosses, so to speak, right? But in time, those went from part-time positions to full-time positions with benefits. And any notion that these were basically there to support the work of counselors became kind of like an afterthought. It was a lot, as I say, there were a lot of people who took on those positions who were campaign workers and remained campaign workers. As soon as supposedly when they punched out the clock, then they could go to work basically at the campaign office.
Because there are no rules for them. There are none.
Right. And there's got to be some rules or prohibitions, simple as that. By the way, and just so I don't want to be across the board here. There may be strong exceptions among some of the current city councilors. And there was one incredible exception in the name of Craig Kelly, who never, ever brought on a city council aide who was anything other than a real pro and a person who was doing serious research.
Let us not forget the great Will Durbin.
That is Will Durbin.
Yeah.
That's right. And that was actually the first, because there was another fellow even after Will as well. So, city councils, at least some city councils, are perfectly capable of being straight up about this, but apparently not all. And I think that's a real tragedy. By the way, I've always felt that, city councilors do need staff. And you can certainly make the
Why?
case.
Why?
No, let me explain.
Okay.
I don't think they need personal staff. And I think having personal staff was always a mistake. But in the city council office, there was always, Sandy Albano, Mary Horgan, and others over the years, and maybe 2 was insufficient. There was a notion that maybe city council committees needed additional staff, tied to the committees. And if you happen to be chair of that committee, that meant you probably had some greater access to a staff person just by virtue of the fact that that was your committee. Now that seems perfectly reasonable, and you could have staff people, if doing actual research for ordinances is an appropriate part of the ordinance committee, because maybe you believe that city staff is insufficient or they don't fully represent you. You can convince me that that might be the case, but the idea of personal assistance has always gone against my grain. It's ripe for corrupt practices, and we're just seeing that borne out. It was predictable as day follows night, night follows day.
I just feel like I'm a little insulted about how stupid they were about it. How blatant, because they clearly don't care. They don't care at all.
Well, over time, basically it was nobody looking. You start to try to creep along and get away with more and more.
I find it ironic. I find it ironic that the people who are the first ones to shoot the arrows of corrupt developer money, and all the bad things that happen when you build shit, are the same people who have no problem playing like who collected the signatures. Oh, we have no idea. And are the same people who are at City Hall every friggin' night, even when city staff are trying to get home to the kids, spouting off about labs or development. And these are the same people who, again, brought us the preservation of parking lots. And that if we built something like Mass and Main, we'd be pushing people into the buses on brooms. Like, God damn.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that there is a better way, but here's the dilemma we're in, is that if doing some sort of prohibition is something requires a change, a clause in a charter, then these city councils, by the way they've doctored it up under last year's amendments to the planning charter, they are the gatekeepers of what can and cannot proceed forward. So the thing is, if there was a proposal to do some restrictions on what their personal aides could do, there's a pretty darn good chance that a majority will say, please, no, we're not interested in that provision.
What was it just saying about? What was it just saying about ethics?
Well, okay. there is that ethical thing there. But, I guess that maybe that just means that some of us have to be a little louder in drawing attention to some of these really poor practices. And if that makes a few more enemies, well, so be it. I can take it.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, what I don't appreciate is the sort of the character assassination type of criticism that people have here. I like to point to specific things that people are doing that I believe are unethical and either that or illegal. But this, again, nobody's saying anything was illegal here, but there is a question about ethics, to be sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, by the way, just since we only have a couple minutes here, I'm going to just say just a couple miscellaneous things. And I'd like to, in the next half hour, talk a little bit about city boards and commissions and some of the proposals that came back from the city manager in a rather impressive collection of ideas a couple of weeks ago. Was it a week ago? Maybe it was a week ago. Can't even remember right now. But I was just saying, I always get the voter databases and do that. So right now, I just as more comedy than anything else, I always keep track of how many people have never missed an election going back as far as I've got records through 1997 in citywide elections. And we are now officially down to, there are just 94 of us left. And it is funny because I look at the list of the 94 names and go, know him, know her, know him, know him. It's like we ought to just form a club, we just go out for beers, So of course, let's to be clear, if you haven't missed an election in that many years, it means you're also not particularly young either, right? Because you have to been at least of voting age back then. So, but anyway, it was sort of a
Always
funny
trying to
little
make these exclusive clubs. Us new people just can never fit in.
I know we don't want you.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. And by the way, I still occasionally go back and look at the great little essay written to me in response to something I wrote by Glenn Kucha, how to become a true Cantabrigian, sort of like to become one of us. And I think it should be required reading for you outsiders.
Fantastic. Send me the brochure.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to cut out now, but we'll be back in 3 whole minutes on Cambridge Inside Out.